Who Comes with Cannons, Chapter 3, Station 6. Todd! Husband! Robert! It's Squire! Truth looked on in shock from where she cowered by the hearth while her aunt slammed the front door shut and bolted it. Then came Matthew Bardwell's voice from the kitchen as he ran into the house. The two boys burst in from the barnyard an instant later. "Squire!" cried Uncle Matthew. As he lay on the floor, the black man gasped out, "They caught me in New York. I busted out of the coffle just down the road from here. Fields will be coming after me with the dogs. Thank goodness he took this road." "Don't talk, Squire. Save thy wind," ordered Uncle Matthew. Truth looked on, astounded, as her uncle moved her gently away from the hearth. Then he and her cousins did a very strange thing. They all knelt beside the hearth. Were they praying? No, they were slowly moving the big, flat hearthstone to one side. Beneath it showed a dark pit. In an instant, Squire had crawled over and squeezed past the stone into the pit. The stone was pushed back into place, and the hearth rug placed over it by Aunt Elizabeth. Still trying to catch her breath, Truth burst out, "He was chasing me!" "No, he wasn't after thee," said her aunt softly. "He knew where to come because he's been here before. Now he's on his way north to freedom again. There is a tunnel from here to the barn, with air aplenty to breathe. Squire knows what he must do, and so do we." The truth came to the girl in a flash. She blurted, "Then this is a station on the Underground Railroad?" "Yes. We hoped thee would never find out," said her aunt. "We were dismayed when someone who did not know about it came here to live." Truth looked at Robert. "Is that why thee has no liking for me?" "It is." He gazed levelly at her. "Thee puts a gun to our heads." Truth protested. "You think I'd tell? I knew a farmer in Indiana who ran a station too. I was proud to know this. I never said a word to anyone. I am proud of thee. I will not tell." "See that thee does not." Now Uncle Matthew spoke up. "The slave catchers will be here very soon. Calm thyselves. Go about thy usual business. Wife, Truth, take up thy mending or knitting. Robert, Todd, go to the barn and stay there. I will meet Mr. Fields when he comes and deal with him. It will be my pleasure." As the boys went out, he sat down in a rocking chair near the hearthstone and put both feet onto the rug. "We shall knit, thee and I," said Elizabeth Bardwell, as she gave Truth the half-knitted scarf she had been working on, and took up the 4 needles and yarn for the stocking she was making. She eyed the girl gravely. "Thee must not tremble, and thee must not say a word. Keep thy eyes on thy work. Take off thy bonnet and sit here on the stool at my feet." As she took off her deep bonnet and heavy outer clothing, Truth asked, "When was the man here before?" 10 years ago. He was a house slave in Alabama. He came to us with a young woman, Lily, who was a cook on the same plantation. They planned to marry in the North as free people. Thee knows a slave marriage can be broken, and the husband, wife, or children sold at any time. How did they catch him? We do not know. We shall ask him when we take him away from here. It would not be easy to capture him. Squire is a very clever man. They must have taken him unawares. Where will he go if they get a hold of him now? Truth shuddered. Her uncle answered, "He will either go back to his master or he will be sold. He's strong. They always want strong slaves in the fields. He'd fetch a good sum. A prime hand sells for a great deal of money. It is a foul trade in human souls, and it shall end. It must. It cannot go on longer, though surely it will take a war to stop it." The 3 of them grew silent. Truth took deep breaths to compose herself while she waited. How could her aunt and uncle be so calm? Her heart still raced as she fumbled with her 2 needles. How could her aunt manage 4 of them? The barking of the slave catcher's dogs was the first warning that the men were approaching. Then came a loud knock on the front door and the order, "Open in the name of the United States." Matthew Bardwell rose slowly and went to the door and opened it. On the threshold stood the handsome Mr. Fields, who demanded, "Give up the fugitive slave you've got here. I know you and I've heard about you. You are Quakers. Are you giving shelter to a man who just ran off from me?" His voice was rasp. "If you are breaking the law of this country, and you will answer for it." Truth stiffened with fright. She dropped a stitch and fumbled to retrieve it. Her uncle answered softly, "There is no slave here, sir. Thee may search, but thee will find no one." He went on, "As for thy law, I care nothing for it. We friends answer to a higher law, that of God. Come inside if thee chooses and search, but do not disturb my wife and niece with thy vile uproar. Truth watched as the man entered. She kept knitting while he walked around, flicking a glance at her as he went by, opening several cupboards and looking inside, and once standing on the very hearth next to Matthew Bardwell's chair. Then he went upstairs, and she heard his footsteps as he went into each of the sleeping rooms. She could hear the barking dogs outside and lifted her head once to see a second man walking about the grounds with them. When he returned to the parlor, Fields gave the Bardwells an angry look. He went through the kitchen to the back door and slammed it shut as he joined his companion. Aunt Elizabeth smiled over her knitting and whispered, "Squire will be safe. He can hear from down there. Once the barn and the other buildings have been searched and the men leave, we shall take care of him." "What of the dogs?" asked Truth. "They will smell nothing but last autumn's hams hanging in the smokehouse." "Where will Squire hide out there in the barn?" Her uncle interrupted her. "Thee knows enough. Thee need not know everything," he said to his wife. "I will fetch a load of hay to someone we know this evening, and Truth, thee and thy cousins may go with me and ride on the hay. Thee three will make my errand seem innocent. Has thee ever gone on a hayride?" Truth shook her head. "In Indiana, they say that's for courting." Uncle Matthew chuckled. "Thee will find this a very interesting ride, too." Bewildered, Truth bent to the scarf to start a pearl row on the patterns. A runaway slave was hiding right beneath them, and her uncle was chuckling and speaking of hayrides before sunset. Besides, a hayride with Robert was not her idea of pleasure. She frowned. Her aunt's laugh surprised her. "I see that thee does not fancy a hayride to Station 7 on a cold night with Robert. I promise he will treat thee better from now on." Seeing that Truth was still puzzled, the older woman went on. "Thee and our boys and thy uncle will not be the only ones going to Station 7. They will ride atop the hay. Someone else will ride under it." Suddenly, Truth realized what her aunt meant. Of course, Squire would be under the load, hidden from sight. Her aunt continued, "I agree with thee, husband. No one would suspect thee if the children went along on this dangerous business." Then to Truth she said, "Niece, the children of friends here serve the cause too, and know the risks of the Underground Railroad. Some are even younger than thee. Truth, will thee go willingly? We shall not force thee." "Yes, Aunt Elizabeth, willingly. I'll go." "Thee knows if thee are caught with Squire, we Bardwells may go to prison, and things may fare badly for thee." "Yes, I know." "Good." Her aunt shifted her knitting to one side and patted Truth's knee with the other. "Thee is a good child, my dear." Tears welled in Truth's eyes at the loving words. She'd had too few of them recently. Yes, perhaps she could be a daughter to the Bardwells now that she understood Robert's behavior toward her. She'd show her worth, not just by sharing hard work, but by sharing danger too. It took an hour for Daniel Fields, the other man, and the dogs to satisfy themselves that no runaway slave was hiding on the farm. Standing at the parlor window, Truth saw them leave. Fields' face was dark with anger, and as he passed the window, he shook his fist at her. A sudden flare of rage made her stick out her tongue in return. Slave catchers were brutes. Another hour passed while the three Bardwell men pitched hay into the back of the big farm wagon and harnessed the team. Then Truth's uncle and cousins came out to the house for their warm clothing. Truth was ready, bundled up in her aunt's heavy coat with several shawls over it. Matthew Bardwell looked at Truth and then at his wife. He said matter-of-factly, "So she has kept her promise to come with us?" "Yes, husband." He nodded and asked, "Is it of thy own free will, Truth?" "Yes." "Is Squire in the hay?" "Burrow deep into it," answered Todd solemnly. Robert added, "He's very weary. He's been on the road in a coffle for weeks. We gave him a warm jacket, a cap, and shoes. We got some of Ma's hot food into him, too. He'll be all right. At Station 7, he'll get what he needs to go on to 8. Elizabeth Bardwell said, "Did Squire tell you anything of Lily?" Todd nodded. "He said they got married by a real preacher up in New York." Robert added, "Squire was a printer's helper in New York City. Slave catchers came inside the print shop and grabbed him. The printer couldn't stop them from hauling him off. Squire says it was good luck Fields took this road south because he'd traveled it before. He'd worked part of his chains free before he got here, and he was ready to run." "It wasn't good luck," avowed Truth's aunt. "It was God's will working for him." Amen to that, agreed her husband. It was not far from sunset when the Bardwells set out for Station 7. Perched atop the hay, Truth waved goodbye to her aunt as Uncle Matthew drove the wagon out of the barnyard and onto the road. Beside her sat Todd, and below them was Robert. Because most of the journey would be made by night, 2 kerosene lanterns occupied part of the driver's seat next to her uncle. They were headed north as Truth had expected. Where else would a station be but northward? She asked, "Can Mr. Fields follow us?" "He could," replied Robert, "but I think he's given up and gone on south of here. We have some neighbors down the road by the name of Gibson who hold with slavery. He'll get a good welcome there, plus whiskey and rest for his horses and coffle." Robert's voice grew bitter now. "The black people are like beef cattle to him and his kind." He spoke down into the hay and asked, "Squire, can they hear me in there?" "I heard you," came a deep voice, muffled by the hay. "I heard the girl, too. Tell her I'm sorry I scared her. Can she hear me?" "I can hear thee," Truth answered. "Thee did frighten me. I didn't understand." Robert explained. "Truth just came here from Indiana. She didn't know we were conductors on the railroad." To Truth's surprise, she heard Squire laugh. Then he said, "This is 2 times you've helped me. I hope I can pay you back, but I don't see how." Todd asked him, "Up in the north, do they say that a war's coming soon, Squire?" "They truly do, and faster than folks think. Working with a printer means a person hears a lot of news. The North's shouting for a war now that Mr. Lincoln's been elected." "And the South is shouting for it too," Robert replied. Todd said, "I want to marry Lucy Coxey before it comes. She's willing." Robert laughed at his brother. "She's been willing since she was 8 years old. All he thinks about these days is love." He said into the hay, "Rest thyself now, Squire. Sleep if thee can. It will be 2 hours to Station 7 if thee remembers it." "I recall that." "Truth, you rest too," said Todd. He put his arm around her and pulled her closer to him for warmth. Truth closed her eyes but couldn't truly rest. The cold twilight winds swept over her and right through the coat and shawls. The risks she was taking made her heart beat faster than usual. She opened her eyes as they passed the meeting house and turned onto another road, still going north. Now they passed carriages and wagons going to and from Goldsboro, and Matthew Bardwell greeted the drivers he knew. No one stopped or spoke long to them. Everyone wanted to get home out of the cold. At last they came to a farm where a big frame house and a grove of bare-limbed trees stood surrounded by a white picket fence. As they turned into the road leading up to it, a man and woman came out, but no dog rushed to greet them, barking as farm dogs were expected to do. Behind them came a tall girl holding a lighted lantern. With a start, Truth recognized her. Martha Buchan. William Buchan, then like his daughter, hailed Truth's uncle. "I see thee has fetched the hay I bought from thee after meeting. Welcome." Truth thought this had to be a signal. The Buchans had not been at their meeting house. In fact, Aunt Elizabeth had said they went to another. The Buchans knew what a delivery of hay, night or day, meant, and they were ready. This was Station 7. Now she guessed why Martha had treated her so coldly at school. She had acted the same way Robert had, and for a similar reason. From atop the hay, Truth called out to her, "Martha, I came along for the ride. I did not expect to see thee." Martha lifted the lantern. Her face was pale and strained, but her mouth bent into a grin as she recognized Truth. She called out, "Thee knows?" "I know, Martha." Friend Buchan ordered, "Take the hay inside my barn and we will unload it. Then come to the house for supper. We've had ours, but there's plenty left over in the pot." "We thank thee, Friend Buchan," said Truth's uncle. Martha walked along holding the lantern next to the wagon as Matthew Bardwell drove the team into the barn. Truth noticed that Martha's eyes were on Robert, and she knew in an instant that Martha fancied him. Sadly, Robert had given her no more than a brief glance. Probably he figured she was much too young to notice. Oh, how much she'd learned about her new family in one day. Truth truly felt part of them now. She had let them know where her loyalties lay and had shown her courage. She knew from the quick smile Robert flashed at her in the Buchan barn that he didn't think of her as a kettle cousin anymore. She smiled at him in return, hoping he could see it from inside the depths of her Quaker bonnet.